Expanded report: has the Republican ALEC doctrine infiltrated our unions and progressive labor leaders? Introduction: the erosion of workers' rights in the United States raises significant questions about the role of unions, political parties, and advocacy groups in addressing these challenges. Critics argue that institutions meant to represent the working class, including unions and political entities like the Democratic Party, have increasingly failed to confront systemic issues such as declining workers' compensation benefits, inadequate federal protections, and corporate overreach. This report explores whether the influence of business interests, specifically through entities like the American Legislative Exchange Council, has compromised unions and progressive labor leaders, leading to a loss of trust among the working class and contributing to Democrats' declining support from this demographic. Historical role of unions and progressive movements. Unions' achievements. Legislative gains. Over the 20th century, unions secured landmark labor laws, such as the Fair Labor Standards Act and the creation of OSHA. Economic equity. Unionized workplaces often guarantee better wages, benefits, and job security compared to non-union environments. Political allies in the fight for labor. Democratic Party, historically aligned with unions, supporting New Deal-era protections and labor-friendly policies. Green and socialist movements, prominent voices for systemic change, though limited in political influence. ALEC's role in undermining labor. ALEC has been a driving force behind legislative initiatives that prioritize corporate interests over workers' rights. Its influence has infiltrated state legislatures, shaping laws that weaken labor protections. Key examples include workers' compensation rollbacks. ALEC promotes model legislation to reduce employer costs, often resulting in lower benefits for injured workers. Preemption laws prevent local governments from enacting stronger labor protections than those at the state level. Right-to-work laws, aimed at diminishing union power by allowing employees to opt out of paying union dues. The decline of the labor movement. Unions and political compromises focus on incremental gains. Many unions prioritize goals like increasing OSHA funding while neglecting broader systemic reforms. This piecemeal approach often fails to address fundamental issues like the erosion of the grand bargain in workers' compensation. Corporate partnerships. Critics argue that unions sometimes enter into cooperative agreements with employers that dilute their advocacy for workers. Membership decline. Union membership has fallen from over 20% in the 1980s to 10.1% in 2022, limiting unions' political and bargaining power. The role of political parties. Democratic Party, while advocating for progressive labor policies, it has faced criticism for prioritizing corporate donations and failing to challenge ALEC-backed laws. Green Party and Socialists. These parties promote robust labor protections but lack the resources to influence federal policies effectively. Criticisms of progressive labor leadership's silence on key issues. Workers' compensation, limited vocal advocacy for federal human rights standards and workers' compensation, resulting in state-level disparities. Gig economy and precarious work, insufficient action to address the rise of precarious employment and its impact on labor protections. Disconnect from the working class. Leaders like Sen. Bernie Sanders and Rep. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are vocal about income inequality, but are criticized for not adequately addressing the dismantling of workers' compensation and occupational safety systems. Alleged union complicity. Some unions are accused of prioritizing internal politics and leadership gains over grassroots advocacy, resulting in a perception of disconnect from workers' realities. The impact on the Democratic Party's relationship with the working class. Loss of trust. The perception that Democrats prioritize urban, college-educated voters over working-class Americans has contributed to a shift of the working class toward Republican populism. Republican strategy. By framing themselves as anti-elite and pro-worker, Republicans have successfully courted traditionally Democratic working-class voters, despite supporting policies that undermine labor protections. Counterarguments and challenges. Union structural limitations. Legal barriers. Supreme Court decisions like Janus v. AFSM have weakened unions' ability to collect dues, limiting resources for advocacy. Economic pressures, global competition, and outsourcing make it difficult for unions to push for expansive labor protections. Democrats' constraints. Polarized politics, legislative gridlock, and Republican opposition hinder the enactment of labor-friendly laws. Corporate donations. While problematic, reliance on corporate contributions is seen as necessary to remain competitive in elections. Recommendations rebuild union membership, focus on grassroots organizing and recruitment efforts in industries with low unionization rates. Strengthen federal protections, advocate for national workers' compensation standards to prevent a race to the bottom among states. Hold political leaders accountable. Workers and unions must demand that elected officials prioritize labor issues in their platforms. Expose ALEC's influence. Increase public awareness of ALEC-backed legislation and its impact on workers' rights. Conclusion: the infiltration of ALEC-backed policies and the perceived compromises by unions and political parties have contributed to the erosion of trust among the working class. To rebuild this trust, unions and progressive leaders must prioritize systemic reforms over incremental gains, strengthen their advocacy for federal protections, and resist corporate influence. Only by addressing these issues can they reclaim their role as true champions of the working class. References: American Legislative Exchange Council. Model Legislation. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Union Membership Summary. Grable, M. Insult to Injury, America's Vanishing Worker Protections. ProPublica. National Employment Law Project. Workers' Compensation, Overview and Issues. AFL-CIO. What Unions Do.